Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Nevada town. While her classmates played with dolls or video games, she spent hours building model airplanes in her garage. Her fingers moved with precision, gluing tiny pieces together, painting intricate details that most people would never notice. But Sarah noticed everything. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, would sometimes bring her to work on weekends. She would sit quietly in the corner, watching the pilots come and go, listening to their conversations about weather patterns, flight paths, and aircraft specifications. The other mechanics thought it was cute how the little girl seemed so interested in boy stuff. They had no idea that Sarah was memorizing every word, storing away knowledge that would prove invaluable years later. When Sarah turned 16, she surprised everyone by using her savings from babysitting and odd jobs to pay for flying lessons. Her instructor, Captain Rodriguez, was skeptical at first. He had taught many eager teenagers who thought flying was all about adventure and excitement. Most of them quit after a few lessons when they realized how much studying and precision was required. But Sarah was different. She absorbed information like a sponge, asking detailed questions about aerodynamics, weather systems, and emergency procedures. While other students struggled with basic maneuvers, Sarah seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how aircraft behaved in different conditions. Captain Rodriguez had been flying for 30 years, and he had never seen anyone pick up the fundamentals so quickly. "You have natural talent," he told her one afternoon as they practiced landing approaches. "But talent isn't enough. You need discipline, study, and thousands of hours of practice." Sarah nodded seriously. She understood that flying wasn't a game. Every decision in the cockpit could mean the difference between life and death. She studied flight manuals late into the night, practiced emergency procedures until they became second nature, and spent every free moment at the airport, watching, learning, and asking questions. By the time she graduated high school, Sarah had her private pilot's license and was working toward her commercial rating. Her classmates were heading off to college or starting jobs at the local casino. Sarah had bigger dreams. She wanted to fly for the military, to push the boundaries of what aircraft could do, to be part of something that mattered. But when she tried to enlist, she faced her first real taste of discrimination. The recruiting officer looked her up and down, noting her small frame and youthful appearance. "Flying fighters isn't like flying those little Cessnas," he said dismissively. "It takes physical strength, mental toughness, and years of training. Maybe you should consider becoming a flight attendant instead." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger, but she kept her voice steady. "I scored in the top 5% on all the aptitude tests. My flight instructor says I have exceptional spatial awareness and reaction times. I want to serve my country." The recruiter sighed and shuffled through her paperwork. "Look, kid, I'm sure you're a decent pilot for someone your age. But military aviation is a different world. The jets are more complex, the missions are dangerous, and frankly, most women don't have what it takes." Despite his doubts, Sarah's test scores were too impressive to ignore. She was accepted into flight training, where she faced new challenges every day. Her fellow cadets, mostly young men from military families, treated her like a novelty at best and an obstacle at worst. During ground school, they would whisper jokes about Barbie pilots and make comments about how she was taking up a spot that should go to a real candidate. Sarah let their words fuel her determination. While they went out partying on weekends, she stayed on base studying technical manuals and practicing in the flight simulators. She learned the specifications of every aircraft in the fleet, memorized emergency checklists for situations most pilots would never encounter, and pushed herself harder than anyone expected. Her instructors began to notice her exceptional skills, but some remained skeptical. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Sarah successfully completed a series of complex maneuvers that had stumped several of her male classmates. Instead of praise, she received a lecture about showing off and taking unnecessary risks. "Flying isn't about proving how good you are," the instructor said sternly. "It's about completing the mission safely and effectively." Sarah bit back her response. She hadn't been showing off. She had been demonstrating that she could handle whatever challenges they threw at her. But she was learning that being exceptional wasn't enough. She also had to be careful not to outshine her male colleagues too obviously, or she would face even more resentment. As training progressed, Sarah earned her wings and was assigned to fly reconnaissance aircraft. It wasn't the fighter jets she had dreamed of, but she was grateful for the opportunity to serve. Her small, agile aircraft were used for surveillance missions, gathering intelligence in areas where larger planes couldn't safely operate. The other pilots in her squadron nicknamed her Tiny because of her petite stature and the small aircraft she flew. They meant it as a gentle joke, but Sarah could hear the condescension underneath. They saw her as a curiosity, a competent pilot who happened to be a woman, but not someone they would turn to when things got serious. Sarah proved herself mission after mission, bringing back crucial intelligence from dangerous territories. She developed techniques for flying in challenging weather conditions that other pilots hadn't mastered. Her reports were detailed and accurate, helping military planners make important strategic decisions. But still, when the squadron gathered to discuss difficult missions or new tactics, the conversation would often quiet when Sarah approached. The other pilots weren't intentionally excluding her, but they had unconscious assumptions about who belonged in those discussions. They respected her skills to a point, but they didn't see her as someone who could contribute to the bigger picture. Sarah's frustration grew as she watched less experienced pilots get assigned to more prestigious missions while she was relegated to routine reconnaissance flights. She knew she was capable of more, but proving it seemed impossible when no one was willing to give her the chance. The breaking point came during a squadron meeting when a new mission was being planned. The target area was known for unpredictable weather patterns and hostile activity. Several pilots raised concerns about the safety risks and the technical challenges involved. Sarah had flown similar missions before and had ideas about how to navigate the specific dangers they would face. She raised her hand to contribute to the discussion. "With respect, sir, I've operated in similar conditions, and there are techniques for dealing with the wind patterns in that region." The squadron leader cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Thanks, Martinez, but this is a discussion for our senior pilots. Why don't you focus on your own missions?" Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissal. But this time, it was mixed with genuine concern. She knew the proposed flight plan had flaws that could put lives at risk, but her attempts to share her expertise were brushed aside because of assumptions about her capabilities based on her gender and the type of aircraft she flew. That night, Sarah sat in her quarters, staring at technical manuals and flight charts. She had dedicated her life to mastering every aspect of aviation, had proven herself repeatedly in challenging conditions, and had earned the respect of her instructors. But somehow, it still wasn't enough to be taken seriously when it mattered most. She thought about quitting, about finding a career in civilian aviation where her skills might be more appreciated. The constant battle to prove herself was exhausting, and the subtle discrimination was wearing down her confidence despite her successes. But as she looked at the photos on her desk, pictures of her with her aircraft, images of the landscapes she had seen from thousands of feet above, reminders of the missions where her intelligence gathering had made a difference, Sarah realized she couldn't give up. Flying wasn't just her job, it was who she was. The next morning, she reported for duty as usual, ready to face whatever challenges came her way. She had no way of knowing that her reputation was about to spread far beyond her small squadron, or that her unique combination of skills and experience would soon become exactly what her country needed. 3 years into her military service, Sarah had become the most experienced reconnaissance pilot in her squadron. She had flown hundreds of missions, accumulated thousands of flight hours, and developed an encyclopedic knowledge of aircraft systems that impressed even the mechanics who worked on her planes. Yet she remained largely invisible to the upper ranks of military command. Her call sign, Viper, had emerged during a particularly challenging mission over hostile territory. Engine trouble had forced her to fly at dangerously low altitudes while evading enemy radar. Using techniques she had developed through years of studying small aircraft capabilities, Sarah had navigated through a mountain canyon system that most pilots would have considered impossible. She struck fast, gathered the needed intelligence, and vanished before enemy forces could respond. The squadron leader, who had once dismissed her contributions, grudgingly admitted that the mission's success was due to Sarah's exceptional flying skills. "She moves through the sky like a viper," he told his superiors. "Fast, precise, and nearly impossible to track." But even with her growing reputation for completing impossible missions, Sarah continued to face the same fundamental challenge. Military leadership still viewed her small reconnaissance aircraft as secondary to the larger fighters and bombers. The assumption was that anyone could fly a tiny plane. The real skill was supposedly in handling the big, powerful jets. This attitude became particularly frustrating during joint training exercises with other squadrons. Sarah would watch as pilots with half her experience were given leadership roles in complex operations, while she was assigned to provide support reconnaissance. Her detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities and terrain features was valued, but only as background information for the real pilots to use. During one such exercise, a simulation of a defensive operation against incoming hostile aircraft, Sarah noticed critical flaws in the proposed strategy. The defense plan relied on intercepting enemy planes at high altitude, but Sarah's reconnaissance flights had revealed that recent weather patterns were creating unusual atmospheric conditions that would affect radar detection and missile accuracy. She tried to share this information with the mission planners, explaining how the atmospheric disturbances could create blind spots in their defensive grid. But her concerns were politely noted and then ignored. The exercise proceeded according to the original plan, and just as Sarah had predicted, the defensive systems failed to detect several enemy aircraft that exploited the atmospheric conditions she had identified. After the exercise, there was the usual debriefing, where mistakes were analyzed and lessons learned. Sarah sat quietly as the senior officers discussed what had gone wrong, proposing various explanations for the defensive failures. None of them mentioned the atmospheric intelligence she had tried to provide beforehand. When the formal debriefing ended, Sarah approached the exercise commander with her original analysis. She showed him the weather data she had collected, the atmospheric readings that explained exactly why the defensive grid had failed, and proposals for how similar failures could be prevented in the future. The commander listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals. But Sarah could see in his eyes that he was humoring her rather than taking her seriously. When she finished her presentation, he thanked her for her input and suggested that she submit her findings to the meteorology department for their consideration. Sarah left the meeting feeling more frustrated than ever. She had the knowledge and skills that could improve their defensive capabilities, but the military hierarchy seemed incapable of recognizing expertise that came from sources they hadn't expected. The pattern repeated itself over and over. Sarah would identify problems, propose solutions, and present detailed analyses based on her unique perspective and experience. Her immediate supervisors would acknowledge her competence, but when it came to implementing changes or including her in strategic planning, she was consistently overlooked. Meanwhile, her reputation among a small circle of specialists was growing. Intelligence analysts, who received her reconnaissance reports, began specifically requesting her for difficult missions. Maintenance crews who worked on her aircraft respected her technical knowledge and attention to detail. Even some of the pilots who had initially dismissed her began to seek her advice on challenging flying conditions. But this growing respect among her peers didn't translate into recognition from military leadership. Sarah remained stuck in the same role, flying the same types of missions, while less experienced pilots were promoted to positions where they could influence strategy and operations. The situation came to a head during a particularly complex operation involving multiple squadrons. Sarah was assigned to provide reconnaissance support for a large-scale training exercise designed to simulate defending against a sophisticated aerial attack. Her job was to scout the enemy formations and report their positions to the defensive commanders. As Sarah flew her surveillance patterns, she began to notice something that the exercise planners had apparently missed. The simulated enemy tactics were almost identical to strategies she had observed during her reconnaissance missions in real hostile territories. But there were subtle differences in how the enemy formations were moving that suggested they were planning something more complex than the standard attack scenarios the defenders were prepared for. Sarah tried to report her observations through normal channels, but the radio traffic was heavy, and her reports were getting lost among dozens of routine position updates from other aircraft. She realized that the defensive commanders weren't getting the crucial intelligence they needed to properly respond to the developing threat. Making a split-second decision that would have serious consequences for her career, Sarah broke from her assigned flight pattern and flew directly toward the command center. Using emergency communication protocols, she demanded immediate attention from the defensive coordinator. "This is Viper, with urgent tactical intelligence," she radioed, using the authoritative tone she had developed during years of flying dangerous missions. "Enemy formations are executing advanced flanking maneuvers consistent with hostile tactics observed in actual combat zones. Current defensive positioning will be inadequate." The radio went silent for several seconds before the defensive coordinator responded with obvious irritation. "Viper, return to your assigned pattern and maintain standard reporting protocols." Sarah realized she was about to end her military career. But she also knew that the exercise was about to become a disaster that would embarrass everyone involved and potentially compromise future defensive planning. She made her choice. "Negative, Command. I'm observing tactical developments that require immediate attention. Request permission to brief defensive leadership directly." What followed was the most uncomfortable 10 minutes of Sarah's military service. She was ordered to land immediately and report to the exercise commander for disciplinary action. But as she was taxiing toward the command building, the defensive systems began failing exactly as she had predicted. The enemy aircraft exploited the weaknesses Sarah had identified, achieving complete tactical surprise and overwhelming the defenders. The exercise ended in total failure for the defensive forces. During the post-exercise analysis, it became clear that Sarah's observations had been completely accurate. Her understanding of both enemy tactics and atmospheric conditions had given her insights that none of the senior officers had possessed. Instead of receiving praise for her accurate intelligence, Sarah faced formal disciplinary action for breaking protocol and disrupting the chain of command. She was reprimanded for exceeding her authority and failing to follow proper procedures, even though following those procedures would have resulted in the critical intelligence being ignored. The disciplinary hearing was a surreal experience. Sarah sat before a panel of senior officers who acknowledged that her tactical analysis had been correct and her intelligence gathering had been exceptional, but they emphasized that military effectiveness depended on following proper channels and respecting the chain of command. "Your flying skills and intelligence capabilities are not in question," the presiding officer told her. "But your failure to work within established protocols raises concerns about your suitability for continued service." Sarah realized that she was being punished not for being wrong, but for being right in a way that embarrassed her superiors. Her crime was not incompetence, but demonstrating expertise that challenged assumptions about who was qualified to provide strategic intelligence. As she left the hearing, Sarah wondered if her military career was effectively over. She had always believed that excellence and dedication would eventually be rewarded. But she was learning that institutional biases could be more powerful than individual merit. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same qualities that made her an exceptional pilot, attention to detail, willingness to challenge assumptions, and dedication to mission success, were also the qualities that made her a problem for military bureaucracy. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing a letter of resignation. She had given everything to military service, but it seemed clear that her contributions would never be fully valued or properly utilized. Perhaps it was time to find a place where her skills could make a real difference, without constantly having to prove her worth to skeptical superiors. She never sent the letter. But keeping it in her desk drawer served as a reminder of how close she had come to giving up on the career that defined her identity. Little did she know that her reputation was spreading far beyond her squadron, reaching individuals and organizations that understood exactly how valuable her unique combination of skills and experience could be in the right circumstances. 6 months after the disciplinary hearing, Sarah had settled into a routine of quiet competence. She flew her assigned missions flawlessly, submitted detailed reports, and avoided anything that might be seen as challenging authority. The letter of resignation remained in her desk drawer, a constant reminder of her frustration, but she wasn't ready to give up completely. Her fellow pilots had mixed reactions to her situation. Some admired her technical skills but thought she had brought the disciplinary action on herself by not following proper channels. Others quietly agreed with her tactical assessments but weren't willing to risk their own careers by speaking up. The result was a strange kind of isolation where Sarah was respected but not trusted with anything beyond routine missions. The squadron had gotten a new commander, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Wells, who had an unusual background for a pilot. Before joining the military, she had been an aerospace engineer who specialized in unconventional aircraft designs. Unlike many military officers who focused on tradition and hierarchy, Wells seemed more interested in results than protocol. During their first one-on-one meeting, Wells reviewed Sarah's service record with obvious interest. She spent particular time examining the incident reports from Sarah's most challenging missions, noting the innovative techniques Sarah had developed for operating in difficult conditions. "Your approach to atmospheric navigation is impressive," Wells said, looking up from the files. "You've essentially created new protocols for operating small aircraft in hostile environments. Have you documented these techniques for training purposes?" Sarah was surprised by the question. In her previous experience, superior officers were interested in mission outcomes, not the specific methods used to achieve them. "I've kept detailed flight logs, ma'am, but I haven't been asked to formalize training materials." Wells nodded thoughtfully. "Your logs show remarkable consistency in challenging conditions. Most pilots see significant performance variations based on weather and terrain, but your mission success rate is essentially flat across all environmental factors. That suggests you've developed systematic approaches rather than just relying on natural ability." For the first time in months, Sarah felt like someone understood what she had been trying to accomplish. Her techniques weren't just individual skills. They were replicable methods that could improve overall squadron capabilities. "I'd like you to work with our training department to develop formal protocols based on your experience," Wells continued. "Your methods for operating in atmospheric disturbances could benefit our entire reconnaissance program." Sarah felt a spark of hope, but she was cautious after years of disappointment. "Ma'am, I should mention that my previous attempts to share tactical intelligence haven't always been well received by higher command." Wells smiled slightly. "I've read about the exercise incident. Your analysis was correct, but your delivery could have been more diplomatic. We're going to work on channeling your expertise through proper procedures while making sure your insights actually reach the people who need them." Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself in an unexpected role as a technical consultant. She worked with training instructors to document her navigation techniques, collaborated with intelligence analysts to improve reconnaissance protocols, and even consulted with aircraft designers about modifications that could enhance small aircraft capabilities. For the first time since joining the military, Sarah felt like her expertise was being properly utilized. Wells had created an environment where Sarah's knowledge could contribute to broader military effectiveness without challenging the hierarchical structure that had caused problems before. The breakthrough came during a planning session for a complex international training exercise. Multiple countries would participate in simulated defensive operations against sophisticated aerial threats. Sarah was included in the planning meetings not as a pilot, but as a technical advisor on atmospheric conditions and small aircraft tactics. As the planners discussed various scenarios, Sarah noticed that they were making the same assumptions that had led to problems in previous exercises. The defensive strategies were based on ideal conditions and conventional aircraft capabilities, without accounting for the atmospheric variables that could dramatically affect performance. This time, instead of challenging the plans directly, Sarah prepared detailed technical briefings that demonstrated how environmental factors could impact the proposed operations. She used her documented techniques and historical mission data to show how small adjustments to timing and positioning could dramatically improve effectiveness. Wells helped Sarah present her analysis through proper channels, ensuring that her recommendations were framed as technical improvements rather than criticism of existing strategies. The approach worked. Sarah's environmental intelligence was incorporated into the exercise planning, and her navigation techniques were adopted by pilots from multiple countries. The exercise was a remarkable success. Defensive operations that had failed in previous simulations worked flawlessly, largely because atmospheric conditions were properly accounted for in the planning. Sarah's techniques for operating in challenging environments proved effective for pilots from different countries flying various aircraft types. More importantly, Sarah's contributions were formally recognized in the exercise documentation. Her innovations were credited with improving overall defensive capabilities and her technical expertise was specifically mentioned in reports that would be distributed to military leadership across multiple countries. For the first time in her career, Sarah felt like she was making the kind of impact she had always dreamed of. Her skills weren't just being used. They were being multiplied as other pilots adopted her techniques and incorporated her insights into their own operations. The recognition led to new opportunities. Sarah was invited to participate in advanced training programs, asked to consult on aircraft development projects, and included in strategic planning sessions where her environmental expertise could inform larger operational decisions. But even as her official status improved, Sarah remained aware that her success depended heavily on Wells's protection and support. Her techniques were valued, but she personally was still viewed with some skepticism by military leaders who weren't convinced that a reconnaissance pilot should have input on strategic matters. The test came when Wells was transferred to a new assignment. Sarah's new commander was a traditional officer who believed in strict separation between different military specialties. Pilots flew missions, intelligence analysts processed information, and strategic planners made operational decisions. There was little interest in individuals who crossed between these boundaries. Under the new leadership, Sarah found herself gradually excluded from the planning and consulting roles she had grown to love. Her technical innovations were still used, but she wasn't involved in adapting them to new situations or developing additional improvements. Sarah realized that her brief period of recognition had been an exception rather than a permanent change in how the military valued her contributions. She was back to being seen as a skilled pilot rather than a technical expert whose insights could improve broader operations. The frustration was worse this time because Sarah had experienced what it felt like to have her expertise properly utilized. She knew what she was capable of contributing, and she had seen how her knowledge could make operations more effective. But the institutional barriers that had always limited her impact were still in place. As Sarah returned to routine reconnaissance missions, she found herself thinking more seriously about civilian opportunities. Major aerospace companies were developing new types of aircraft that required exactly the kind of expertise she had developed. Her military experience and technical innovations would be highly valued in the private sector, but leaving the military would mean abandoning the mission that had driven her throughout her career. She had joined to serve her country, to use her skills in defense of national interests. Taking a corporate job would provide better recognition and compensation, but it wouldn't give her the sense of purpose that military service provided. Sarah was wrestling with this decision when she received an unusual message. Her squadron's communications officer handed her a sealed envelope marked with classifications she had never seen before. The return address was simply a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her. Inside was a brief note requesting that she report to a secure communications facility for a classified briefing. No explanation was provided, and the authorization codes were from agencies she didn't recognize. As Sarah drove to the communications facility, she wondered what kind of mission could require such secrecy. Her reconnaissance work was classified, but it followed standard military protocols. This felt different, more mysterious, and potentially more important than anything she had been involved with before. The communications facility was located in an unmarked building on a part of the base she had never visited. Sarah had to pass through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring different forms of identification and authorization. When she finally reached the designated room, Sarah found herself facing a communications setup unlike anything she had seen before. Multiple secure phone lines, encrypted computer terminals, and satellite communication equipment filled a room that looked more like a high-tech command center than a simple briefing facility. A senior officer she didn't recognize gestured for her to sit at the main communications console. "Captain Martinez," he said formally, "you're about to receive a communication that will significantly impact your military career. The calling party has specifically requested you by name and call sign. Your response to this conversation may determine whether you continue your current assignment or transition to a completely different type of service." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized that years of frustration and struggle had led to this moment. Someone, somewhere, had specifically sought her out for reasons she couldn't imagine. Her reputation had apparently spread far beyond her squadron, reaching individuals or organizations that understood exactly what her unique combination of skills and experience could accomplish. As the officer activated the communication system, Sarah prepared herself for a conversation that would change everything she thought she knew about her military career and her future opportunities to serve her country. The secure line crackled to life, and Sarah heard a calm, authoritative voice that carried the weight of absolute command. Captain Martinez, this is General Patricia Morrison, Deputy Commander of NORAD. I understand you go by the call sign Viper. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, was responsible for monitoring and defending North American airspace against all threats. It was the highest level of aerospace defense, dealing with everything from routine air traffic to potential missile attacks. Why would NORAD's deputy commander be calling her directly? Yes, ma'am, Sarah managed, her training taking over despite her surprise. This is Captain Martinez, call sign Viper. Captain, I'm going to be direct because time is a factor. General Morrison continued. We've been monitoring your service record and technical innovations for the past 18 months. Your atmospheric navigation techniques, your ability to operate small aircraft in conditions that ground other pilots, and your intelligence analysis capabilities have caught our attention. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and confusion. She had no idea that anyone at NORAD even knew she existed, let alone that they had been tracking her career. 3 days ago, Morrison continued, we detected unusual atmospheric disturbances over the northern Pacific that are interfering with our standard detection systems. These disturbances appear to be natural, but they're creating blind spots in our radar coverage that could potentially be exploited by hostile aircraft. The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. Her expertise in atmospheric conditions and small aircraft operations wasn't just useful for routine reconnaissance. In the right circumstances, her specialized knowledge could be crucial for national defense. We need someone who can operate effectively in these atmospheric conditions to investigate the disturbances and determine whether they pose a genuine security risk, Morrison explained. Your squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Wells, recommended you specifically for this mission before her transfer. She believes you're uniquely qualified to handle the challenges involved. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Wells, who had apparently been advocating for her even after leaving the squadron. But she was also concerned about the scope of what Morrison was describing. Ma'am, what exactly would this mission involve? Sarah asked carefully. You would be temporarily assigned to a joint NORAD task force investigating the atmospheric anomalies. Your job would be to fly reconnaissance missions in conditions that our larger aircraft can't safely navigate, gathering data that our standard surveillance systems can't collect. Morrison paused, and Sarah could hear the seriousness in her voice when she continued. Captain, I need to be clear about what we're dealing with. These atmospheric disturbances are unlike anything we've seen before. They're creating radar shadows that extend for hundreds of miles, and they're moving in patterns that suggest either extremely unusual natural phenomena or possibly artificial manipulation. The implications hit Sarah immediately. If hostile nations had developed technology that could create artificial atmospheric disturbances, they could potentially mask large-scale aerial operations from American detection systems. The national security implications were enormous. The mission would require you to operate at the very edge of safety parameters, Morrison continued. You'd be flying in atmospheric conditions that could damage aircraft systems in areas where standard rescue operations might not be possible if something goes wrong. When Sarah thought about her years of developing techniques for operating in challenging conditions, all the missions where she had pushed her aircraft and her skills to their limits, this would be different, not just technically challenging, but potentially crucial for national security. Ma'am, what resources would be available for this mission? Sarah asked. You'd have access to the most advanced atmospheric monitoring equipment we possess, along with technical support from NORAD's best scientists and engineers. We're also prepared to modify your aircraft with specialized sensors and communication systems that would allow real-time data transmission, even in severe atmospheric interference. Morrison's tone became more personal. Captain, I've read every report about your service, including the disciplinary action from 6 months ago. You were right about the tactical intelligence in that exercise, and your methods were sound. Your mistake was trying to work within a system that wasn't designed to utilize your expertise properly. Sarah felt a complex mixture of vindication and uncertainty. Recognition from NORAD's leadership meant more than she could have imagined. But it also represented a level of responsibility that intimidated her. This mission would be different, Morrison continued. You'd be working directly with specialists who understand atmospheric science and aerospace defense. Your insights would be valued and implemented immediately, not filtered through multiple layers of bureaucracy. How long would this assignment last? Sarah asked. Initially, 2 weeks of intensive preparation and training, followed by an operational period that could last anywhere from 1 week to several months, depending on what you discover. If the mission is successful and you're interested in continuing this type of work, there could be permanent opportunities within specialized NORAD units. Sarah realized that this was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for throughout her military career, a chance to use her expertise at the highest levels of national defense, working with people who understood the value of her specialized skills. But it also represented a significant risk. If she failed at this mission, particularly given its high-profile nature and national security implications, her military career would effectively be over. On the other hand, if she succeeded, it could open doors to opportunities she had never imagined. "Ma'am, I'm honored to be considered for this mission," Sarah said carefully. "But I'd like to understand more about the technical challenges involved before giving you a final answer." "That's exactly the kind of careful thinking we're looking for," Morrison replied with what sounded like approval. "Report to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs tomorrow at 0800. You'll receive detailed technical briefings and have a chance to examine the atmospheric data we've collected. After that, you can make an informed decision about whether to accept the assignment." Morrison paused again, and her voice took on a more serious tone. "Captain, I want you to understand that this conversation and everything we've discussed is classified at the highest levels. Regardless of whether you accept the mission, you cannot discuss any aspect of this communication with anyone not specifically cleared for this operation." "Understood, ma'am," Sarah replied. "One more thing," Morrison added. "The atmospheric disturbances we're investigating appeared suddenly and without warning. If they are artificially created, it suggests technological capabilities we weren't aware of. This mission could be crucial for understanding whether we're facing a new type of threat to national security." After the communication ended, Sarah sat in the secure facility trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 20 minutes, her entire career trajectory had potentially changed. She was being offered the chance to work at the highest levels of aerospace defense, using her specialized skills for missions that could impact national security. The drive back to her quarters gave her time to think about the implications. Accepting this mission would mean leaving behind the familiar frustrations of squadron life. But it would also mean taking on responsibilities and risks that were far beyond anything she had experienced before. That evening, Sarah called her father at the airport, where he still worked as a mechanic. She couldn't tell him about the NORAD mission, but she could talk about the career decisions she was facing. "Dad, what would you do if you were offered a chance to do exactly the kind of work you'd always dreamed of, but it meant taking risks that could end your career if things went wrong?" Her father was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Sarah, I've watched you work since you were a little girl. You've always been willing to take on challenges that other people were afraid of. That's what made you a great pilot. But the biggest risk isn't trying and failing. It's never trying at all, and spending the rest of your life wondering what you could have accomplished." After hanging up the phone, Sarah looked at the letter of resignation she had kept in her desk drawer for months. She realized that tomorrow's trip to Peterson Air Force Base represented a fork in the road. She could either continue her current path of gradual frustration and limited recognition, or she could take on a mission that could define the rest of her career. As she packed her gear for the trip to Colorado Springs, Sarah felt a combination of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't experienced since her first solo flight years earlier. Tomorrow, she would learn whether her years of developing specialized expertise had prepared her for challenges she couldn't even imagine. The uncertainty was intimidating, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was moving towards something that could fully utilize her capabilities and satisfy her desire to make a meaningful contribution to national defense. Whatever she learned at Peterson Air Force Base, her life was about to change in ways that would either vindicate everything she had worked for or demonstrate that some challenges were beyond even her considerable skills. The flight to Colorado Springs gave Sarah time to reflect on how dramatically her life was changing. Less than 48 hours earlier, she had been flying routine reconnaissance missions and contemplating resignation. Now she was heading to one of the most secure military installations in the country for a mission that could redefine her entire career. Peterson Air Force Base looked different from other military installations Sarah had visited. The security was more intense, the facilities more advanced, and there was an atmosphere of serious purpose that distinguished it from routine training bases. This was where some of the most important national defense decisions were made. Sarah was met by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a civilian atmospheric scientist who would be her primary technical contact for the mission. Dr. Vasquez had a PhD in atmospheric physics from MIT and had been working on advanced weather monitoring systems for NORAD for over a decade. Captain Martinez, Dr. Vasquez said as she led Sarah through a maze of high-security corridors, "I've read your service records and technical innovations. Your atmospheric navigation techniques are exactly what we need for this investigation." They entered a briefing room filled with displays showing satellite imagery, weather data, and radar coverage maps. The complexity of the information was overwhelming, but Sarah could see patterns that related to conditions she had encountered during her flying career. "These are the atmospheric disturbances we've been monitoring, Doctor," Vasquez explained, pointing to swirling patterns on the satellite images. "They appeared suddenly 3 weeks ago and have been growing stronger and more organized. What makes them unusual is that they seem to be moving in ways that don't match normal weather patterns." Sarah studied the images carefully. Her experience flying in challenging atmospheric conditions had taught her to recognize subtle patterns that others might miss. "The movement vectors suggest these disturbances are being influenced by something other than natural pressure systems," she observed. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what our computer models are indicating. But we need someone to actually fly through these conditions to gather direct measurement data. Our larger aircraft can't safely operate in these disturbances, and our satellite systems can't penetrate them effectively." Over the next several hours, Sarah received detailed briefings about the technical aspects of the mission. The atmospheric disturbances were creating electromagnetic interference that disrupted normal radar systems, making it impossible to detect aircraft that might be operating within them. If hostile nations were using these conditions to mask military operations, the threat to national security could be enormous. "Your aircraft will be modified with specialized sensors that can function even in severe electromagnetic interference," Dr. Vasquez explained. "You'll be gathering data about the composition and structure of these disturbances that we can't collect any other way." Sarah was introduced to the team of engineers and technicians who would be supporting the mission. Unlike her experience in squadron assignments, these specialists treated her as an equal partner whose expertise was essential to mission success. They asked detailed questions about her atmospheric navigation techniques and incorporated her suggestions into the mission planning. The modified aircraft was impressive. Sarah's familiar reconnaissance plane had been equipped with sensors and communication systems that represented the cutting edge of atmospheric monitoring technology. The cockpit displays had been upgraded with real-time data feeds that would allow her to navigate using information that no pilot had ever had access to before. "The challenge," explained Chief Engineer Martinez, no relation, despite the shared name, "is that these atmospheric disturbances change rapidly and unpredictably. Normal navigation systems become unreliable, and visual references are often obscured. You'll need to rely on the specialized sensors and your own flying instincts." Sarah spent 2 days familiarizing herself with the new equipment and practicing with simulation systems that reproduced the conditions she would encounter. The training was unlike anything she had experienced before. Instead of following established procedures, she was developing new protocols as she learned about the equipment capabilities. On the 3rd day, General Morrison arrived for a final mission briefing. Seeing the NORAD deputy commander in person reinforced for Sarah how important this assignment was and how much her career prospects depended on its success. Captain Martinez, General Morrison said as she reviewed the mission parameters. "You're about to gather intelligence that could determine whether we're facing a new type of threat to national security. The data you collect will inform decisions at the highest levels of government." Morrison's expression was serious as she continued. "If these atmospheric disturbances are artificially created, it could mean that hostile nations have developed capabilities that fundamentally change the nature of aerospace defense. Your mission isn't just reconnaissance. It's determining whether we need to rethink our entire approach to protecting North American airspace." The weight of responsibility was enormous, but Sarah felt prepared for the challenge. Her years of developing expertise in atmospheric conditions had given her exactly the skills needed for this investigation. For the first time in her military career, she was being asked to do something that no one else could do as well. The mission launch took place at dawn from a secure airfield in Alaska. Sarah's aircraft had been transported there under strict security protocols, and the area had been cleared of all non-essential personnel. The secrecy surrounding the operation reinforced how sensitive the intelligence gathering would be. As Sarah performed her pre-flight checks, she thought about all the people who had doubted her capabilities over the years. The squadron mates who had called her tiny, the instructors who had questioned whether she belonged in military aviation, the commanders who had dismissed her technical expertise. None of them could have imagined that their underestimated colleague would be chosen for one of the most important reconnaissance missions in recent military history. The flight into the atmospheric disturbances was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The specialized sensors showed her environmental conditions that were far more complex and dynamic than normal weather patterns. The electromagnetic interference was so severe that it would have disabled standard aircraft systems, but her modified equipment continued functioning perfectly. As she flew deeper into the disturbances, Sarah began collecting data that confirmed everyone's worst fears. The atmospheric conditions were clearly artificial, created by technology that was far more advanced than anything in the American arsenal. The disturbances were being used to hide massive aerial operations that could only be described as preparation for large-scale military action. Using her atmospheric navigation techniques, Sarah was able to penetrate areas of the disturbance that no other pilot could have reached. The intelligence she gathered revealed the presence of aircraft and facilities that represented a completely new level of threat to national security. But as Sarah prepared to return with her crucial intelligence, she realized that her aircraft was being tracked by hostile forces who had detected her presence despite the electromagnetic interference. What followed was the most challenging flying of her career. Using every technique she had developed over years of operating in difficult conditions to evade pursuit and escape with the vital data. When Sarah finally landed back at the secure airfield, she was met by General Morrison and a team of intelligence analysts who immediately began processing the information she had collected. The data confirmed that the nation was facing a new type of threat that required completely different defensive strategies. "Captain Martinez," General Morrison said after reviewing the preliminary analysis, "the intelligence you've gathered is going to change how we approach aerospace defense. This mission has been an extraordinary success." But Morrison's expression remained serious. "The threat we've discovered is more significant than we anticipated. We need someone to lead a new specialized unit that can operate in conditions where our standard aircraft are ineffective. Based on your performance, we'd like you to consider a permanent assignment, developing and leading these capabilities." Sarah realized that her years of struggling for recognition had led to this moment. An opportunity to create and lead exactly the kind of specialized operation she had always envisioned. Instead of fighting for acceptance in traditional military roles, she would be pioneering new approaches to aerospace defense. The assignment would mean leaving behind her squadron and taking on responsibilities that were far beyond her current rank and experience. But it would also mean working at the cutting edge of military aviation, using her expertise to protect national security in ways that no one had attempted before. As Sarah considered the offer, she thought about the letter of resignation that was still sitting in her quarters thousands of miles away. She had written that letter because she felt like her talents were being wasted in a system that couldn't properly utilize her expertise. Now she was being offered the chance to define new ways of utilizing those talents for the most important missions possible. "General," Sarah said finally, "I'm honored by your confidence and excited about the opportunity to contribute to national defense in this capacity. I accept the assignment." Morrison smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. "Welcome to the cutting edge of aerospace defense, Captain. Or should I say, Major Martinez. Your promotion is effective immediately. As Sarah flew back to her home base to collect her belongings and officially transfer to her new assignment, she reflected on how dramatically her career had changed. The pilot who had been dismissed as tiny and disciplined for challenging authority was now being entrusted with developing entirely new approaches to national defense. The journey from underestimated squadron pilot to leader of specialized NORAD operations had taken years of persistence, skill development, and refusing to accept limitations that others tried to impose on her capabilities. But it had also required the recognition and support of leaders like Lieutenant Colonel Wells and General Morrison, who understood that exceptional capabilities could emerge from unexpected sources. Sarah's story became an inspiration for other military personnel who felt undervalued or overlooked. Her success demonstrated that expertise and dedication could eventually overcome institutional biases, but only for those willing to persist through years of challenges while continuously developing their skills. The specialized unit that Sarah developed became a model for how military organizations could better utilize the diverse talents of their personnel. Her atmospheric navigation techniques were eventually adopted throughout the Air Force, and her approach to intelligence gathering in challenging conditions became standard protocol for reconnaissance operations. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to colonel and given command of an entire aerospace defense region, she made sure that her organization actively sought out and developed unconventional expertise. She remembered what it felt like to be underestimated and overlooked, and she was determined that talented personnel in her command would have opportunities to contribute their capabilities fully. The call sign Viper became legendary in military aviation circles, not just for the daring missions Sarah completed, but for her role in demonstrating that the most valuable military capabilities could come from sources that traditional leadership might not expect to produce exceptional results. Sarah's transformation from underestimated pilot to national defense leader showed that persistence, continuous learning, and refusal to accept artificial limitations could eventually create opportunities to make the kinds of contributions that defined not just individual careers, but entire approaches to protecting national security.